The year is 1988. The Cold War is nearing its end, but the world is still grappling with a new kind of threat: international terrorism. Airports, once symbols of progress and connection, now carry an undercurrent of anxiety. Security measures are being heightened, but the threat remains, lurking in the shadows. It is against this backdrop of global unease that our story unfolds. High above the clouds, the initial hours of the flight pass without incident. Passengers enjoy in-flight entertainment, some drift off to sleep, others chat with their companions. The flight attendants tend to their duties, offering refreshments and ensuring the comfort of those on board. In the cockpit, the pilots maintain contact with air traffic control, following their designated flight path. Everything seems to be proceeding as planned, a routine flight on a routine day. However, beneath the surface of this normalcy, a sinister plan is about to unfold. Unbeknownst to the passengers and most of the crew, 4 men harbor a dark secret. They are not ordinary travelers but members of Hezbollah, a militant group with a violent agenda. Armed and determined, they have boarded the plane with a specific objective in mind: to hijack the aircraft and use its passengers as leverage in a high-stakes hostage situation. Their target, the Kuwaiti government. The initial shock of the hijacking gives way to a chilling realization for the passengers and crew of Kuwait Airways Flight 422. They are now pawns in a deadly game of international intrigue. The hijackers waste no time in making their demands known. Their primary objective, the release of 17 Shiite prisoners. Identifying themselves as Hezbollah, they add weight to their threats. Their words leave no room for doubt. They are deadly serious. The original flight plan is abandoned, the Boeing 747 now a flying prison. Kuwait Airways Flight 422 is now a pawn in a dangerous game. Inside the cramped confines of the hijacked aircraft, a palpable atmosphere of fear and uncertainty takes hold. The initial shock morphs into a gnawing dread as the gravity of the situation sets in. The hijackers patrol the aisles, their weapons a constant reminder of the precariousness of the situation. The air is thick with tension, punctuated by the curt commands of the hijackers and the stifled sobs of those who fear for their lives. Amidst this nightmare, whispers of hope and resilience begin to emerge. The hijacked Boeing 747, its once familiar markings now a chilling reminder of its captive state, becomes a ghost ship. The original destination, Kuwait City, fades into a distant memory as the hijackers dictate a new course. The first stop is Mashad, Iran, chosen for its symbolic value. The landing, rough and tense, does little to ease the fears of the hostages. Negotiations begin, a delicate dance between the Iranian authorities and the hijackers. The arrival in Mashad brings not relief, but a heightened sense of anxiety. The hijacked Boeing 747, a stark symbol of the crisis, sits on the tarmac, ringed by Iranian security forces. Inside, the hostages endure another grueling chapter in their ordeal. The Iranian government treads a delicate path, caught between pressures. Food and water are delivered, a small concession amidst the despair. The hijackers remain resolute, proclaiming they won't back down. After 8 long days in Mashad, a glimmer of hope emerges. The hijackers agree to release a small group of women and children, families reunited, their joy tinged with the knowledge that loved ones remain trapped. The world watches, captivated by the drama unfolding on their television screens. The release does little to appease the hijackers' demands. If anything, it hardens their resolve. 2 Kuwaiti passengers are brutally murdered, their bodies dumped onto the tarmac. The hope that had flickered so briefly is extinguished. Section 3, Destination, Algiers. With the situation in Larnaca untenable, the hijacked plane becomes a ghost ship once more. The hijackers, their hands stained with blood, their demands unmet, force the pilots to make for another destination, Algiers, Algeria. For the remaining hostages, it is a journey into the unknown, each takeoff and landing a reminder of their precarious existence. The world watches transfixed as the drama unfolds, a real-time thriller with the highest of stakes. Algiers, the coastal capital of Algeria, becomes the latest stage in this agonizing drama. The Algerian government, experienced in dealing with hostage situations, adopts a cautious approach, a mix of firm resolve and a willingness to negotiate. The hijackers, their options dwindling, find themselves increasingly isolated. Yet, they remain defiant, their demands for the release of the prisoners unwavering. The world holds its breath as days turn into weeks. Inside the sweltering cabin of the hijacked aircraft, the remaining hostages endure unimaginable hardship. Their resilience, tested to the limit, begins to waver, yet even in the darkest of hours, the human spirit finds a way to endure. Acts of kindness, small but significant, help to sustain them. A shared joke, a whispered prayer, a comforting touch, these become lifelines in a sea of despair. Diplomatic tightrope. Kuwait Airways Flight 422 sat on the tarmac in Algiers, a political pressure cooker. The world watched with bated breath, the fate of the hostages in balance. The hijacking evolved into an international incident, drawing in governments. Kuwait refused to negotiate with terrorists, a point of principle. The nation, scarred by executions, was caught between a rock and a hard place. To give in would betray the memory of those lost. Yet standing firm risked the lives of those still captive. The Algerian government, as mediator, walked a diplomatic tightrope. They sought to secure the hostages' release, mindful of the hijackers' demands. A delicate balancing act, one wrong move could tip the scales towards tragedy. Section 2. International pressure mounts. As days turned into nights and nights back into days, the international community grappled with the unfolding crisis. Condemnation of the hijacking was swift and universal. The brutal execution of the 2 Kuwaiti passengers, a chilling reminder of the terrorists' ruthlessness. Yet, beyond the chorus of outrage, a consensus on how to resolve the situation remained elusive. The United Nations, its Security Council, convened an emergency session, called for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages. Diplomatic channels, buzzing with activity, carried pleas for restraint, for a peaceful resolution to the crisis. Yet, the hijackers, seemingly unmoved by the global outcry, clung to their demands, their resolve seemingly strengthened by the attention their actions had garnered. The United States, its own history entangled with the complexities of the Middle East, offered its assistance. The FBI, seasoned veterans of hostage negotiations, shared their expertise with their Algerian counterparts, their advice tempered by the knowledge that this was uncharted territory, a hijacking unlike any they had encountered before. The specter of a botched rescue attempt, a repeat of past tragedies, loomed large, a stark reminder of the fragility of the situation. Inside the stifling cabin of the hijacked Boeing 747, the hostages existed in a state of suspended animation. Days bled into one another, marked only by the passage of time and the ever-present fear that gnawed at their insides. The initial shock had given way to a numbing routine, a desperate attempt to find a semblance of normalcy in the midst of their nightmare. The hijackers, their faces hardened by days of tension and fatigue, remained a constant threat. Their moods, unpredictable and volatile, shifted with the winds, their anger a simmering pot threatening to boil over at any moment. The hostages, acutely aware of their vulnerability, walked a tightrope of their own, their every word, their every action, scrutinized for any hint of defiance that might trigger a violent response. Food, when it arrived, was meager and unappetizing, a reminder of their captive state. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and shallow, punctuated by nightmares and the ever-present fear of what the next day might bring. Sanitation, a luxury they had once taken for granted, became a major concern. The cramped conditions and limited resources breeding a sense of despair. Yet, even in the depths of their despair, the human spirit found a way to endure. As days turned into weeks aboard the hijacked Kuwait Airways Flight 422, the physical and mental toll on the hostages became increasingly apparent. The stifling heat inside the cabin, exacerbated by the Algerian sun beating down on the fuselage, created an oppressive atmosphere. The air, thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and stale air, was difficult to breathe, a constant reminder of their confinement. The meager rations provided by the hijackers did little to alleviate the gnawing hunger that plagued the hostages. The food, often consisting of dry bread and watery soup, was barely enough to sustain them. Water, even more precious in the sweltering heat, was rationed carefully, each sip a reminder of their precarious situation. Sanitation became a major concern as the days turned into weeks. The limited facilities on board the aircraft were overwhelmed, and the once familiar routines of hygiene became a distant memory. The lack of proper hygiene combined with the stress and exhaustion took a toll on the hostages' health. Minor ailments, easily treated under normal circumstances, became magnified in the confined and unsanitary conditions of the hijacked aircraft. The hijackers, seemingly indifferent to the plight of their captives, offered no medical assistance. The hostages, their bodies weakened and their spirits broken, were left to fend for themselves. Amidst the despair, glimmers of humanity shone through. Stripped of their freedom, they found solace in shared adversity. Small acts of kindness became lifelines. A shared piece of fruit, a comforting word, reaffirmed their bonds of humanity. They drew strength from one another, sharing stories, singing songs, and offering prayers. Parents shielded their children, creating normalcy amidst chaos. The elderly were cared for with tenderness. Desperation began to set in. Some contemplated escape, their minds racing with plans. Others retreated into themselves, their silence a testament to the psychological toll. The hijackers became increasingly erratic, their threats more frequent. The situation threatened to spiral out of control. The prolonged captivity and constant threat of violence took a heavy toll on the hostages' mental state. Anxiety permeated every waking moment. The hijackers' unpredictable moods were a constant source of stress. Every interaction sent shivers down their spines. Cramped conditions exacerbated the psychological strain. The scorching Algerian sun beat mercilessly down on the grounded Boeing 747, turning its metal skin into a furnace. Inside, the air grew thick and heavy, saturated with the stench of sweat, fear, and despair. The once familiar hum of the aircraft's engines had fallen silent days ago, their absence a constant reminder of the hostages' precarious situation. Time, once a steady rhythm marking the passage of days, had lost all meaning. Days bled into nights marked only by the meager meals delivered by their captors and the relentless heat that pressed down upon them. The hostages, their bodies weary, their spirits frayed, existed in a state of suspended animation. They moved through the motions of living, eating, sleeping, talking, but their thoughts were always tethered to the grim reality of their situation. The world outside the confines of the hijacked aircraft continued to spin, but for those trapped within, it felt as if time itself had stopped. Newspapers smuggled in with their meager rations offered glimpses of a world grappling with their plight, but these glimpses only served to deepen their sense of isolation. They were adrift in a sea of uncertainty, the shores of freedom tantalizingly out of reach. As the days stretched into weeks, the hijacking of Kuwait Airways Flight 422 became a global spectacle. A drama played out on television screens and radio airwaves around the world. The eyes of the world were fixed on Algiers, where the hijacked aircraft sat on the tarmac, a potent symbol of the fragility of peace and the reach of terror. News crews from around the globe descended upon the Algerian capital, their cameras capturing every twist and turn of the unfolding drama. Experts and analysts weighed in, offering their perspectives on the hijackers' motives, the likelihood of a peaceful resolution, and the potential ramifications for international relations. The world held its breath, united in its concern for the hostages and its condemnation of the terrorists. The families of the hostages, their lives upended by the crisis, found themselves thrust into the glare of the media spotlight. Their faces, etched with worry and fatigue, became familiar sights on news broadcasts around the world. They issued heartfelt pleas for the release of their loved ones, their voices cracking with emotion as they shared their stories of anguish and uncertainty. Despite the despair that hung heavy in the air, whispers of hope began to circulate among the hostages. The Algerian government, known for its experience in dealing with hostage situations, had adopted a patient and measured approach, engaging in dialogue with the hijackers while simultaneously working behind the scenes to secure the hostages' release. Rumors of progress in the negotiations spread like wildfire through the stifling cabin, offering a glimmer of light in the darkness. The hostages, their spirits buoyed by the news, clung to these whispers of hope as if they were lifelines. The thought of seeing their loved ones again, of breathing free air once more, fueled their determination to endure. The hijackers, though still in control, seemed to be softening their stance. Their demands, once non-negotiable, were now the subject of intense back and forth. The pressure from the international community, coupled with the Algerian government's unwavering commitment to a peaceful resolution, was beginning to take its toll. The hostages, though still wary, dared to believe that their ordeal might soon be over. Inside the stifling cabin of the hijacked Kuwait Airways Flight 422, anticipation and dread filled the air. Whispers of hope had turned into palpable tension. Hostages clung to the fragile possibility of freedom, bracing for their captors' whims. Hijackers, fatigued and frustrated, moved with agitation. Their initial bravado had given way to simmering tension. Negotiations stalled, leaving uncertainty and fear. The Algerian heat amplified the claustrophobia within. The air, thick with sweat and despair, was difficult to breathe. The world watched in horror as events took a sinister turn. After 16 grueling days, the hijackers committed an act of unspeakable brutality. 2 young Kuwaiti men were dragged from their seats, their pleas drowned out. Their bodies were dumped onto the tarmac at Algiers airport, a gruesome message. The world reeled in shock and condemnation. The news of the hostage release rippled across the globe, a collective sigh of relief mixed with lingering disbelief. For 16 agonizing days, the world had watched, transfixed. The hijacked plane on the tarmac in Algiers, the tearful reunions at Larnaca airport, the chilling sight of the murdered hostages. In Kuwait, a nation shrouded in mourning, the hijackers had walked free, their escape a bitter pill to swallow. The ordeal of Kuwait Airways Flight 422 cast a long shadow over the lives of those aboard. The physical scars healed, but psychological wounds ran deep. Nightmares and flashbacks haunted them for years. The hijacking profoundly impacted aviation security. Enhanced security measures became the norm worldwide. The incident remains a stark reminder of the human cost of extremism.